Hello everyone and welcome to this webinar. We'll be getting started in just a short time. Okay, it's just gone 4 o'clock here in the UK, and so let's get started. Welcome everyone to this webinar, Fast or Secure. You can only pick two, and joining me today on this webinar, I'm very pleased to invite Daniel Carr and Nate Ashford. Hey, how's it going?
Hey Simon, good to be here.
Excellent. So we're going to do some quick introductions and then talk a little bit about respective companies, and then we're going to have some good fun jumping into a live demo where we're going to show an application which is part of a pipeline being currently deployed onto Amazon AWS. And we're going to show a vulnerability. We're going to hack that vulnerability. We're going to fix that vulnerability, and ultimately show how we can diagnose, find, and see the how exposed we are for that vulnerability at different stages during the pipeline. So why don't I go ahead and introduce myself first, and then we can listen also to Daniel and to Nate. So my name's Simon. I run the developer relations and community team here at Snyk. I've been here a few years now at Snyk. Very happy to be here talking to you today. I do a lot of community work in and around user groups and Java user groups, etc. And yeah, I'll be doing a lot of the demo here today. So over to you, Daniel.
Right. Welcome also from my side. My name is Daniel Carr. I'm with Dynatrace for more than a decade right now. And right now I'm focusing on our brand new offering of application security, which you will see throughout the demo later.
And I'm Nate Ashford. I'm a lead technical coach with Cprime. I lead our practice around technical agility within the product agility space, and really helping folks look at how we use technology well to drive our ability to pivot with market conditions. And especially love working in our dojos and other things of that sort. We can talk about that a little bit later if there's some time.
Awesome, wonderful. So welcome to Daniel and to Nate as well. I'd love to hear a little bit about yourselves. So why don't you feel free to drop into the chat, or perhaps the Q&A, a little bit about yourself. Perhaps tell us where you're from or what your favorite ecosystem is. My favorite ecosystem is Java. We're going to be using a Node application here today, but we'll see what you like as well. A little bit about this webinar. This is a live webinar, and we will be recording this webinar and providing it back to you as a replay, and we'll be emailing you about that shortly. If you have any questions or chat throughout, feel free to drop it into the respective panels in the GoToWebinar control panel. I have a feeling that we're only going to be able to see the Q&A questions, so maybe that's probably the best place to put them in. Sometimes the chat doesn't work too well on this platform. Okay, so we're also going to be talking a little bit about Atlassian, and Atlassian are one of our all of our partners, in fact, and we're going to be using Bitbucket quite significantly in this demonstration as well. Okay, so we'll briefly go through a number of these slides initially. Sorry, there we go. A little bit about Snyk. So Snyk is used by 2.2 million developers around the world. We are a company of over 500 employees and have raised almost 500 million in funding over the last 5 to 6 years. We're about a 5.5-year-old company as well. We care about developers who are developing fast while staying secure, and we're used by many different enterprises and startups the like, as you can see on the right hand side. As a platform, we care about things that developers touch. So that goes from code that developers write across to open source files and open source libraries that developers pull in, even to the Docker files and containers which a developer will bundle their application in, and as well as the infrastructure as code that will be bundled along with that to deploy. We care everything about from the great developer experience across to integrating throughout the SDLC, as you'll see in a second. Again, caring about all the different types of artifacts that developers touch, making sure we address issues across our very, very broad and wide-ranging security intelligence platform. And
So
it's
real quick,
important that
fast feedback, Simon. The
yeah.
slides aren't showing.
Oh, the
And
slides aren't showing. Pardon me. Thank you very much for that. There we go. Let me jump a couple. There we go. So those are some of the numbers that I was mentioning just a minute ago. Cool. That could have been a boring webinar if I hadn't shared my screen, huh? Those are some of the numbers that I was mentioning just a moment ago. And also some of the files, some of the artifacts that we secure here at Snyk, and the stack really that we care about, everything from the developer UX all the way down to scaling across with big enterprises and making sure that governance is available as our users scale. Devsecops is is an important trend right now, and this is something that throughout that pipeline we need to make sure that we get integrated with, and this is something which we're all looking at to kind of like doing across different product sets, and where we focus heavily on really is the developer side and making sure we're early in that early feedback loop, but of course we do have integrations across the pipeline, so everything from code all the way up through to production here is covered as well. Over to Daniel from Dynatrace.
Right. So briefly introduce our company as well, our organization, and this might be a little bit outdated as well already. But right now, or when we actually created the slide, we had more than 2,500 customers. I think we are now well above 2,400 employees at this point. And we still do every 2 weeks a major release. So that gets us to 25 releases a year. We've been in the Gartner Magic Quadrant in the leaders segment for a decade right now, and for a little bit over than a year, now listed on the New York Stock Exchange. That's so much for our company. I wanted to briefly talk about our offering as well. So Simon, maybe if you get me to the next slide. Thanks. So briefly talk about the Dynatrace software intelligence platform, how it works. Some of you might be familiar with it. So essentially Dynatrace is coming, as talked about on the previous slide, from the observability market. So we've been market leader there for many years, and we ingest trace metrics, logs, and many other things, such as user behavior, code level insights, additional metadata that we use to automatically build a topology of your deployments. All of that captured through the one agent and other input sources. And essentially on top of the really high fidelity, fine granular data, we have different solutions. And as said before, our core offering, applications and microservices, together with infrastructure monitoring, business analytics, digital experience monitoring, we now give you an additional way of looking at that data, which is application security. So we utilize the power of the one agent that more than 2,500 customers already have in their environments rolled out throughout the life cycles, can now be leveraged and used to also get insights about security. And we come through that throughout the webinar. And then of course the Smartscape topology map helps to really assess that the impact and that kind of things. I'm coming to that on the next slide. So our approach to DevSecOps is really to, with the one agent being built in your tech stack essentially, and in the ecosystem that you run your applications on, you move from sort of being security rather than being a process that people need to follow, or sort of extend that with the one agent built into, for instance, your Kubernetes platform or all your hosts that you run your applications on, not give you insight only about, deep, application behavior, but also now from a security angle. And that brings me to my last slide, where I briefly essentially, show how Dynatrace sort of helps to, that's good.
Apologies. Let me jump to this one instead.
All right, thanks. So, the traditional scanning approach or, third-party vulnerability detection approaches are typically happening on a static scanning approach, right? So you might scan your static repository or, install also images, and that will give you insights about vulnerabilities, right? And you get a report that says you have one, two, many vulnerabilities coming out of that scan, essentially, right? So Dynatrace, on the contrary, runs with the one agent, as said before, at several hundred thousands of our customers in production environment. And production is typically that sort of instance that's under attack or that gets attacked. And Dynatrace sits there already with the one agent and monitors, or has deep insights about code execution and libraries that are getting loaded. So by just essentially using Dynatrace application security, we get an automatic 100% visibility into your production instance, right? So whenever a new deployment makes it to production, Dynatrace essentially automatically would realize that and would notify you about that. Or on the contrary, if a new vulnerability gets published, you immediately have an insight if you are affected or if your production environment is affected. And as a matter of fact, Dynatrace is used throughout all different stages by our customers. So, the one agent monitoring and is also used in staging or early development environments. And the reason for that is because people want to have obviously an early insight on how their production environment might look, down the road in a week or in 2 weeks or in a version or in 2 versions. And people also want to understand that from a performance or architectural integrity perspective, right? And now even more with a security perspective, right? So you obviously want to get a forecast and obviously, shift left your security insights. And the last thing I want to highlight is, as said or indicated before, is with the topology model that Dynatrace automatically creates, what we can bring to the table here is, take the CVSS core that is essentially, always assuming the worst case scenario, and then look at how that library is uniquely used in your deployment, understand if through the traversing the topology, if there is exposure to the internet, or if there is a database access happening, if you sort of switch your perspective 180 degrees and look how your traffic flows through a deployment, Dynatrace can help reassessing that CVSS core and say, this is exposed, there is database access happening, this is probably of higher priority than it looks like from just looking at the standard CVSS core. And we'll have a look at that in the live demo. Thanks, Simon. Back to you. Or actually over to Nate, right?
Over to Nate, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, so as I mentioned, I'm with Cprime. We're a global consulting firm. And in fact, actually just this morning, we got a little bit more global. We just announced this morning that we've acquired RadTech. They're a group of agilists, especially focused in the scaled agility area in the UK. And so we're expanding more deeply into that market. We're also, we cover all aspects of agility. We can get all the way into the tools implementation and hosting. So we're AWS partners. We're an Atlassian Platinum partner. In fact, we're the 2019 Partner of the Year. And we're also SAFE partners. And I get heavily involved in that. So we cover a blend of a lot of different things. If you'll flip to the next one here, Simon. So we have enterprise agility. Our perspective is that it's a blend of product, agile, and technology to drive value. Right? The value organizations are trying to capture as they work with their customers. It requires all 3 of those things. It requires understanding what the product is so that we're building the right things, so that we're doing the right stuff. And then it also requires agility and the ability to flow work out to the customer quickly and to be able to pivot quickly with changing market conditions. But that pivot, it requires that the technology itself be capable of shifting as well. And so we work with organizations across all of those, whether it's with their tool implementations, whether that's implementing all of the tools that you're going to see here in the demo, as well as the coaching on the mindset and the organizational practices and the structure and process and all those kinds of things. And so if you flip to the next one, Cprime offers help at all of those different levels, whether we're looking at leadership and the opportunity to get into the way we think at a strategic level, all the way at the very top, down to at a team level, coaching and training and dojos. Dojos I mentioned a little bit ago. It's actually kind of one of my areas of passion and love. These are immersive environments where we help teams develop the habits that promote flow and delivering that value, blending all those things, product, lean, agile, DevOps, and really thinking about how do you get feedback faster, and how do we that whole fast and secure that we're talking about here today. We want good quality engineering and getting that feedback early in the process so that we're delivering the value for the customers at the speed that they need it. So back to you, Simon. That's me, or that's us at Cprime.
And we're over to the live hack now. So that's pretty much all our slides, I believe. So let me drop that, and I'm going to jump over into our application now. So we're going to do a couple of things. First of all, I'm going to show you the application and the pipeline. And then we're going to be jumping over to have a look at, our visibility into the application. So this is an interactive. We're going to do an interactive hack on this application as well with an exploit in a minute. So get ready to provide your input into how you think we're going to attack this application. So remember some of the areas that I'm going to be talking about here. So we have a goof application. This is just a regular node application. You can see it has an input box, and I can do things like add some to-dos. Very, very straightforward and simple application. It also has an about box, which is served from, as you can see, the public directory, and it's just an about HTML, very, very simple and straightforward. You'll notice that this is being served from AWS. And in fact, if I was to come over here, you'll see my source code for this application is in Atlassian's Bitbucket. And we have pipelines and pipes set up that we'll show you a little bit later, which do automatic pushes across to ECR. So it bundles these, it bundles the application into a Docker container. It drops this into ECR and then automatically deploys that across into EKS. So this is running on Kubernetes pods in EKS nodes. That's pretty much everything I'm going to show you. The couple of other things is I can show you things like a package JSON, of course, which has all my packages and things like that, as you would expect. And the attack we're going to be doing is going to be on one of these dependencies that we'll be looking into a little bit more depth. So with that, I'm going to stop. I'm going to stop my screen share here. I'm going to pass over to Daniel, and Daniel's going to show you a little bit about how you can do, how you can look at this application now from a Dynatrace angle. So I'll pass over to Daniel now.
And I hope you can see my screen.
You can.
With Dynatrace security on it. Yeah, I think I'm sharing the right one.
Yeah, looks good.
We'll make this a little bit bigger. All right, thanks. So, essentially what we are doing right now is looking at the application as it's out there, right? So, here is our sample application, our little to-do list. Simon will walk through that in a couple of minutes, and Dynatrace is monitoring that right now. Here is all the vulnerabilities that Dynatrace actually found in my environments. And actually what I'm looking at is all different sorts of vulnerability in multiple applications that I'm monitoring here. So let me actually zoom into my goof application, which is our to-do list over here. So now I'm filtering only on those vulnerabilities that are actually affecting the application that you just saw. So, let me briefly walk you through that screen and then dive a little bit deeper on one specific vulnerability. So over here you get, the risk assessment as it will come from a vulnerability provider, just like Snyk is, right? So, you will get a risk level assessment and the CVSS score. And now what Dynatrace is doing again with the, topology analysis, Dynatrace can help you to understand if that specific, vulnerability has exposure to the outside or is accessing as a database. And if an exploit is available or not is then again coming from the Snyk integration. So let's go a little bit further down here. So it's a very simple application. It's essentially one Node.js front end that's handling all of it. So any vulnerability that might be loaded by the Node.js runtime is automatically exposure to the internet and is seeing sensitive data. So the one thing that we want to focus on in this webinar is that one down here, the directory traversal. And because we've heard that might be actually exposed, or we might be, actually really having users taking advantage of that vulnerability. So let's dive into that. Again, up here, you will see an overview, if there is a public exploit available, if there is exposure to the internet and whatnot, right? Now, through traversing, hold on, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. So down here, we essentially tell you what the vulnerable component is and how many processes essentially have been loading that specific vulnerability. Again, it's a very simple demo environment that we have here. So we only see one process loading that. Now, by traversing the topology, Dynatrace can tell you that this specific, process is running on that host, is accessing that database, is running our goof, service, and no surprise, also hosts sort of the goof web application that you just saw in the other browser tab. Dynatrace also tell you what container images are affected by that specific vulnerability, which helps you in rapidly finding, the development team that needs to work on getting this remediated. Now up here, what you actually see, or what Dynatrace helps you to understand, is really understand what vulnerability or more details about the vulnerability. So let me briefly go into the Snyk integration here. So you get a description, and with following that link, you get directly onto the details page of that specific vulnerability, getting more details, and also very interesting, a recommendation on how to remediate that specific issue. And it's typically on what version you need to upgrade with, the library essentially.
Sorry to interrupt, Daniel. Would you mind just zooming in a little bit on that screen?
On the last one, or just in general?
On this one, please. Yeah, that'd be fine.
Okay.
Thank you.
Right. Is this better?
That's getting better. Yeah, thank you.
That's a little bit too much. All right. So now up here, essentially, it's almost like an exposure map, right? So Dynatrace tells you again through the topology information that the affected process is what database it's accessing and what process is exposed, right? So let me actually briefly go into and understand a little bit more on what's going on behind the scenes. So by going into the affected process, which is, by the way, the same that's exposed, so it doesn't really matter on which one we drill in, and it will immediately become clear what analysis is running behind the scenes here by Dynatrace. So what I'm opening up here is details. Unstable network connection. Wait. There we go. So details about that specific Node.js process, and from here I'm getting right into the topology view. So what I can see is this is the Node.js process that has loaded the vulnerable library and at the same time has exposure to the internet through, this is essentially the website. That is the code, Node.js code that's running on top of my runtime, and it's hosted in an AWS data center, right? So actually, if I go into that goof application, what I can see is, you know, all the inbound traffic. And if I go further down here, Dynatrace also tells me that I might extend it for 6 hours. Dynatrace actually proves that there has been an exploit of that vulnerability that we've seen before. And this can be found here on top errors, where actually, you know, somebody sent in a URL to get to that password list, right? And that is essentially now the question on that I'm asking myself, you know, who is responsible now for that application? And if I scroll up, Dynatrace also gives you the option in you know, working with tags, and one of them is, you know, who owns that specific application, and it says Simon. So I'm getting it back to Simon to essentially, you know, work on and remediate that specific issue.
So it's my problem, right? It's the dev's problem, I guess.
Yeah. So I found it. Now you need to fix it.
Always the dev problem, right? Okay, so we know there's a problem. We've found there's an issue, and with Dynatrace in production using using the you know the Snyk database information, we've recognized there has been an exploit or has been an attack. And what we want to do is we want to be able to go in and actually try and fix that issue. Okay, so there's a number of places we can fix it, but the place that I'm going to start is I'm going to go ahead and move over to Snyk. I already have a Snyk account, but you can create one for free if you like, and then you can start importing projects from a number of locations. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to import a project through Bitbucket Cloud. So as I mentioned, this application exists in Bitbucket Cloud. And in fact, the one I'm going to update is going to be this goof AWS Dynatrace instance. I'm going to add that selected repository. And what that does is it allows me to connect directly into that Bitbucket instance. And we now have a Snyk app, which is going to monitor that repository. But what it also does is it imports all the artifacts it can find. For example, there's a package JSON. It's found some YAML and a whole bunch of other stuff. So I can kind of like view this project, and you'll see in our package JSON, we have our dependency graph. And our dependency graph is essentially all the libraries, whether direct or transitive, which construct our application that we essentially deploy. And somewhere in here is going to be this vulnerability, this directory traversal vulnerability. So why don't I go over to my issues tab, where we see all our listed vulnerabilities, and I'm going to find a directory traversal, which was the vulnerability that actually goes ahead to you know, gather that etc password. And here we can see we have a directory traversal vulnerability, and this is a vulnerability which is a medium severity vulnerability. You can see a priority score here. The priority score is based on a number of things, including the severity of the vulnerability, CVSS score, whether a fix is available, whether it has an exploit, which we can see it does have an exploit here. This vulnerability is coming in through version 0.24 of our library, the ST library, and it's actually fixed in 0.25. So we could go ahead and fix this vulnerability. But first, why don't we go ahead and exploit? And I'm not sure actually I can see the Q&A. So I wonder if a couple of people can just type something in the chat just to see if that's visible. So make sure you are responding to either organizers and panelists, or everyone, if you're able to do that, just to see if I can see some of those requests. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to. If not, no worries. I can still take you through that exploit. Doesn't look like I can see anything just yet. So I'll go ahead and show you how we will go ahead and perform that exploit, and then how we're going to go ahead and remediate that. So back to our application, and if you remember on that Dynatrace screen, you saw an amount of encoding, which is what we're actually going to use to exploit this application. And we're exploiting this application by attacking this public directory effectively. And you'll notice that on this, I'll go to a terminal in a second, just so it makes it a little bit clearer. But as part of this URL, you'll see a large Amazon endpoint followed by /public/about HTML. So if I look at that, you'll see this is the HTML that we just saw in the browser. Nice. But you'll also see that it's serving it from the public directory, as you can see just here, public. I'll make this a touch bigger just in case you can't see that. Serving that from the public directory. And what we want to do is do a directory traversal. Now, a directory traversal is where we break out of a directory which we should have access to, in this case, public. And we try and break out of that into a space on the server, which we shouldn't really be. And we might see sensitive data here. We might see some code. We might see some app files. We might even see more sensitive information on the system. So let's go ahead and try that. So if I was to ask, and maybe this is just a kind of question that we think about rather than respond in the chat here, but if we was to think, how are we going to try and perform an exploit? Some of you might think, okay, to do a directory traversal, how do I break out of that safe directory? And a lot of you are maybe thinking, well, let's do a .. because that's, you know, ultimately what we're trying to do. So something like a .. here, we break out of the public directory and try and find some sensitive info. So I do that, and let's see what we get. Well, we see some HTML, not really a directory listing, and we also see by milk. We see a delete for that to do. We see the goof to do homepage title. So what we're really seeing here is the homepage, and we're seeing the homepage because ST is a real world library. This is our application, our dummy application, but ST is a real world library used by tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of applications. And it recognizes that these dots are indeed part of a directory traversal attempt. No one will try and, you know, curl using .. slashes. You would just use the absolute path. So the question is, how can we send this to the server, circumvent the sanitization that the ST library is providing or trying to do, and then continue to do a directory traversal? And the answer is encoding. So you saw in Daniel's screenshot there was %2fs or %2es potentially. Now %2f represents that slash, and a %2e represents the dot. Now I'm just going to do a couple of %2e, %2es, and then a slash, because what this is what the ST library is looking for is a ... slash. Okay, so I can copy that and execute that, and you'll see this is a directory listing now, right? You can see the public directory is here, and so we've broken out of that public directory, and we're now, as an attacker, looking at our application on the file system. So what might you, as an attacker, think about what you might want to look at now? Well, you can see just in this directory there might be a number of things you might want to look at. There's a db.js, so maybe what we'll do is we'll copy that and have a look at the db.js, and bang, you can see some source code. So now we can start looking around the environment, looking for maybe some sensitive data that's been hard coded. Oh, sorry, I did an ls. Let's go back out there. What we might also want to do is look at the Docker file. There's a good one. %2e Docker file. If we look at that, you can see the Docker file there. You can see it's not using the user directive, which causes another vulnerability potentially, as using root. So this is the hack that we've performed, being able to go back. And in fact, before I leave this nice little hack, let me show you and go all the way back, if I wanted to, like this, to the etc password, because as a root user, I have root access into the system. So now I can look at the etc password. I might look at the shadow file of this environment as well and have a look at some hashed passwords. So now I can start looking at this environment. And these are the types of attacks that Daniel saw in our environment. So let's go back to our environment here, and let's have a little think about what we want to do here. Now, what I might want to do with our Snyk Jira integration is from this vulnerability, I might want to raise a Jira ticket. But if I raise a Jira ticket, I'm going to have to fix that anyway. So I could do that if it was something that I knew we wanted to kind of like push back a little bit or have another team creating that. So in this case, I'm not going to create a Jira ticket. I'm going to open a fixed pull request straight away against our Bitbucket repository. And what we're going to do is, because we imported this from that Bitbucket repository, if I click open a fixed PR, this is going to send the minimum required upgrade to Bitbucket to upgrade that package JSON to the version that has that fix implemented in it. And you'll see that right here. So we can see on our files page, you'll see a package JSON here. If I open that package JSON up, or in fact, if I look at that in just a second, in fact, you'll see this is jumping from a 024 to a 025. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and merge that. I'll close out that source branch and merge. And so now we're now doing an upgrade from 024 up to 025. And if I click on my source now, you'll be able to see in my package JSON, we're using the 025 ST package. Okay, now I'm going to jump over, before I jump into my pipeline, I'm gonna just jump into the Bitbucket pipeline here, and Nate, who's on the call, is going to kind of like give us a little walkthrough of some of the things that we've got here, and also in and around Bitbucket pipelines and the usefulness of pipes and things like that. So Nate, if you're on, talk us through that a little bit.
Yeah, so this is actually a fun topic, right? Because the stuff that Dynatrace is showing you is super valuable, right? You want to be able to see at the very end, like when it gets out onto a machine, what's vulnerable, what's going on with it, and really instrumenting and monitoring your systems. But we're here talking about Devsecops, right? And Devsecops is all about how do we get that feedback sooner, shift left. So how do we shift left? Well, first off, if you're familiar with DevOps at all, you've probably heard the continuous delivery pipelines, right? And these pipelines are all about, let's take everything that we care about for, is this thing ready to go to production? And let's automate that, and let's get that feedback on every build before we ever get it out on a machine. So this file here is defining a pipeline that does exactly that, and it's got the security part built right in, using Snyk and the scans for both the source. Now, so you notice here this first step where we're looking at scan at, and this is looking at scanning for open source dependencies. But notice then there's also a second scan that happens as the next step, and that one is looking at the container image. And so we can do these multiple layers of scans. Now, Simon, so help us kind of understand the difference between what's happening at these two different stages.
Absolutely, yes. So in the first one, what we're really looking at doing is just scanning our application, exactly as you say. And the way we've done it is just by adding a Bitbucket pipe. And a Bitbucket pipe, as you can see, there are a number you can add here. Snyk is one, and Dynatrace have another as well. And this is just a neat way of adding in, through extensibility of Bitbucket here, a particular feature. What we're doing here, or function, what we're doing here is using our Snyk authentication token. We're going to do an npm scan to target our package JSON, and we're going to create a code insight results report there. In the second time around, we're going to be creating a Docker image, and we're going to do a similar scan, but this time on the Docker file and the Docker image that is therefore created. Straight after that, once that all of that goes through, we're going to publish that up to ECR. So we're effectively going to push that image across over to ECR, and then we've finally got a deploy stage where what we do is we actually deploy that across as a container into the EKS environment as another pipe, and effectively run that. But then Daniel, why don't you talk us through the final stage of the Dynatrace push event?
Need to unmute myself first. So essentially what we do there is register the deployment event at Dynatrace. So you will be able to see or have that context, that additional context of deployment events in Dynatrace as well. And we have a look at the Dynatrace CI a little bit later in.
Okay, so what we're saying then is every time we push a piece of code, just like the one you just pushed a minute ago, right? It's currently in the process of merging. We're going to automatically build the application, but we're going to scan it first to see see what kind of vulnerabilities are there. And then once we do get it built, we're going to scan the built container, looking for any vulnerabilities there. And then go test the deployment out to an environment where, again, we can see what's happening at this time by looking at it with Dynatrace. And so at every different level, we're getting that feedback of what's happening with our application, what's working and what's not. And that's kind of cool. I mean, that's a whole lot faster than just waiting for what we saw earlier, right? Daniel saw in the Dynatrace monitoring, we had a vulnerability, and went and notified Simon on the development team that, hey, we got an issue. You need to go resolve that, open a ticket, and go get that fixed. Well, now as we're a development team, if we're getting that feedback in our normal build process every time we make a change, we don't have to wait for somebody to tell us. Our systems are already telling us that there's something that we need to work on. But here's a question for you, Simon. I mean, that still takes a while, right? We're still getting that information later in the process after we've already built it, after we've already pushed it into our code base. Is there a way that we can get that feedback even earlier, shift even further left?
Yeah, so I would say this is a great question, actually, and I think this is, having short feedback loops is really important. And I think one of the shortest feedback loops is pretty much, as a developer here in my familiar place is somewhere like VS Code, right? Directly in the IDE. So this is a way in which developers are pulling in new function, new features, new libraries from for a new feature, and they want to have that feedback instantly. And one of the ways in which you can do this kind of thing is by using the static testing of Snyk in the IDE. So a great example here is within VS Code, as you can see, these annotations on the right hand side tell me where my vulnerabilities exist in these libraries. So ST, for example, the library that I just fixed, I fixed one of these vulnerabilities, right? But there's still 3 more vulnerabilities. So what I can do is I can click on Fix Vulns, and this will show me all the vulnerabilities in that library, and it will show me 2 of the ones. In fact, here is some of the directory traversals. Looks like there's a couple of, one directory traversal and a second vulnerability, medium open redirect in that same package. There's also a couple of indirects, so you can see 2 vulnerabilities here that are as a result of the ST package pulling in 2 further packages. So the remediation here would be to jump to version 1.2.2, which would eliminate all of these vulnerabilities. So this gives you the package view of how you can remediate. But this is really where that feedback loop is at its shortest. So you have really nice balance between security throughout the pipeline. And there's no one best place where you can test for security. If you want 100% accuracy, you do it on that far right where you see what's in your production environment, and you see where the vulnerabilities are and what's actually running in your environment. However, that's not always the fastest for feedback and to speed. So you can also do it very, very early. And at that point, you can fix cheaply and you can fix fast with a very, very quick feedback loop. And so doing all of these things provide us with that absolute safety net in production, while being able to be very reactive and proactive, in fact, in these fixes during development. But Nate, it's not all about tools, right? And it's not all about process. What about the culture piece? What about the mindset? How do we get people to do these kind of things?
It's interesting. We get brought into a lot of organizations, and I've worked with teams where security was a little different than the loop that Daniel was just showing. The figure 8 with security kind of around the outside. A lot of times it feels like you got a loop for development and a loop for operations, and then security kind of gets tacked on the end. And the security aspect of that is it leads to a very difficult relationship with the security team, right? And it seems like you get these adversarial kind of relationships of, oh, the security guys, all they're there to do is to slow us down and get in our way. We can't do anything. But what we're helping organizations understand and really change is that can be a partnership and an engagement where we can start at the very beginning with engaging with our friends in the security groups and looking at how do we bring that into the development early on, right? Because most of that friction between the security side and the development side has to do with the fact that we are actually waiting until after we've got it all built, and then security has to say, no, 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 you have to go back and fix all these things, right? If instead we're engaging from the very beginning and shortening feedback loops, right? And it's not just feedback loops with the tools, it's feedback loops with the people. If we're engaging early on, we get to a point where we're building in and thinking about security as well as deployability, as the same as availability and stability and maintainability. That just becomes one of the other things that we're building in and thinking about as we're developing our applications to begin with. And as a result, security becomes not something that is a huge headache. It's just kind of part of the thing, right? Because there's not a whole lot of rework. There's not a whole lot of go back and redo things. We're just building secure code from the very beginning because we've got this kind of feedback, right? I mean, when we've got this kind of feedback all the way at the very beginning of, hey, you've got these dependencies that are issues, but it's not just dependencies, right? Because you've got the SAST scanner going on as well, right? That can start telling us, oh, hey, that's an insecure practice, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So if we jump back to the screen, this is an interesting thing because we're now fully deployed. So I, as a developer, can just push my code and have this all working nice and neatly now in our production. We had Daniel over in production telling me about this vulnerability. Who ultimately should take the ownership, do you think, of security, Nate?
Really, it belongs to everyone. And this is where, again, it's not security's job to go, hey, secure my application when we're done. It's my job, as I'm building it, to actually build it secure in the first place. And that means, again, that goes back to the engaging folks from the very beginning, understanding, leveraging the tools that are available, and finding the tools that are going to help me get that information I need when I need it.
Awesome. So let's actually see if this, well, the app should still be up, I presume. There it is. And if I go back to my home page, we should hopefully still see everything happily. There's my buy milk still on my to do. That's great. We can see here that our deploy has been done. We obviously have our report that I showed you, which is from the Bitbucket Insights report. You can see all of our pipes, including our Dynatrace, and back over here, we've scanned our Snyk scan on our container, and we've also done our Snyk scan on our application. And if we wanted to at these stages, we can block the build if we choose. We can block it based on severity type and things like that. So to make sure we're not kind of like, going back and regressing our application in any way. So let's actually go ahead and try and break our application again. So if I was to run this again, last time you saw we got our shadow file. Here I'm going to run exactly the same command, and this time we get a cannot get. So if I try and go back and get any of those files as I did before, db.js not found, I can't now do that, and all it was because is I was using a vulnerable version. Let's actually jump across back over to Daniel. And Daniel, can you show us now, if I make you the presenter, could you show us now what it looks like from the Dynatrace side?
Yeah, so it's we didn't pick it up yet. Give me just one more second. So I don't see yet a deployment event. I hope the pipeline still works. It's always, the fun of doing a live demo.
Absolutely right.
So maybe the deployment event was not sent over. Also, hold on, checking a few more things over here.
I'll kick off a quick rerun just in case that helps, but maybe it's just a timing.
Yeah.
So that deployment event, what's that triggering on the Dynatrace side?
It's essentially just augmenting and giving more context, so you can actually understand, the vulnerability is gone. Was this, or what was the reason for it, right? And then it would figure out, oh yes, there was a deployment coming in. So it's not really triggering anything. It's just augmenting and sort of annotating for more context.
Okay, I'll kick off a rerun there anyway. Let's take a question coming in. A question has come in saying, does the solution have dynamic scanning capabilities, or how to scan applications already in production? So from the Snyk side, I'll give an answer, and then we can kind of talk with Daniel there on the production side as well. So from the Snyk side, we're entirely statically scanning. So we're looking and in the SCA and the Docker file examples as well, we're looking at artifacts which will tell us which vulnerabilities exist in those specific versions. So we looked at the package JSON for our application SCA testing, and that tells us the direct dependencies. We'll also look at log files if they exist. That will tell us about the direct dependencies, and those direct dependencies themselves will have dependencies and dependencies and so forth, and you'll get the directory, you'll get the dependency tree and graph from that. We'll then look through that graph and try and identify which vulnerabilities are active in each of those library versions. From the container, very similar. We'll look at the base version, we'll look at the packages that come in on those versions, and we'll identify which vulnerabilities exist against those packages as well. How about from the runtime point of view, Daniel?
Yeah, so if you want to sort of use the existing terminology in the market of a scan, then Dynatrace would compare to an always-on real-time scanning, right? So, but the reality, the underlying mechanics of that is, you have an agent that deeply monitors code execution of a specific runtime, let's say a JVM or an Node.js runtime, right? So Dynatrace understands whenever a new library is loaded and immediately checks its metadata and then matches it against the Snyk vulnerability library. And just like that, you are aware that you have a vulnerable piece of library or piece of software running in your environment, right? No matter where the one agent sits, it can be as early as a dev environment, a load testing environment, a hardening environment, or a production environment. Doesn't really matter. The one agent essentially always monitors the runtime, what code is executed, what libraries are loaded, and at any time, whenever a new, let's pick Kubernetes, right? So a new container gets deployed, a new pod comes up, Dynatrace automates. So Dynatrace essentially sits with the one agent, as an operator in the fabric. No matter what happens to the Kubernetes cluster, any new piece that comes up, automatically Dynatrace will monitor it, monitors code execution for performance, aspects and all that good stuff. It now also looks at, what libraries are loaded and, matches that immediately. Or the other way around, if you have a Kubernetes cluster or, any other, sort of traditional stack or traditionally architectured application, Dynatrace knows at all times what libraries are loaded in your JVM or, other runtimes. And when a new vulnerability gets published, for instance, by Snyk, you immediately know if you're affected or not. You don't need to wait for another scan or something like that.
Awesome.
That's the answer from Dynatrace.
Yeah. We have another question coming in, but before, I'd love to hear from Nate in terms of your experience of what you've seen. Do you see people mostly doing static testing, dynamic testing, or DAST, IAST, or a combination of the two?
So a lot of what we'll see is organizations are running a combination of a scanner, checking for dependencies. Oftentimes at release time, again, we're working harder to get that push further into the development pipeline. And then they're also typically doing some amount of penetration testing afterwards, right? So again, in the real time, in the deployed state, doing a series of tests to confirm vulnerabilities and running from that side. And a lot of the security teams, that ends up being a big part of what they're doing is the dynamic penetration testing afterwards.
Awesome. A couple of questions that are coming in. How are the risk scores calculated in Snyk, and can they be customized by practitioners to account for critical versus non-critical services? Great question. So in fact, why don't I go ahead and actually, Daniel, if you want to make me presenter just briefly,
Sure.
I'll quickly share my screen on Snyk and show how.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me share this screen, log in briefly. And what I'll do is if I go down and show any one of my projects, so let's grab this same one. In fact, go to my package JSON. There are a couple of things here. One is the severity. The severity is based on the CVSS score. The CVSS score is a score given to a vulnerability based on the criticality of that vulnerability. For example, you know, what is the setup? How can it change anything? Do you need to log in to be able to do this? What, you know, that kind of stuff. This is a score which is a priority score, and it can be based on a number of things, like does it have an exploit that is mature? In this case, this one does have a mature exploit. Does it have a fix available? So in other words, can it you know, if it doesn't have a fix available, maybe it is lower down in the risk. Whereas if there is a known fix and a public fix, a public vulnerability, a public exploit, then that can very easily be run against it. So there's a number of things which account for that, and that is typically between 0 and 1,000. In terms of the second part of that question, you can change whether, you know, I might say, you know what, this is a back end, it is a high or a critical business criticality, and this is in production. I can then later in my reports and things like that be able to say, I want to only see things that are in life cycle production and has a business criticality of high, for example. So I'm able to equally do those things as well. And you can use that data with people who have kind of like big backlogs of vulnerabilities. You can use that data to be able to identify which ones you want to look at first. Okay, if there's any other questions, feel free to drop them into the chat. How are we looking, Daniel? Anything on the side? Another question that's coming. What is an example of an auto-remediation that can be taken to quickly eliminate a security threat? This is a great question. Auto-remediation. So depends what you mean by auto-remediation. There are some things that you can, like auto-merge as a good example, but you have to be a little bit careful when you do those kind of auto-merges, because obviously you need that compatibility between your source and the other items. Other things that you might want to quickly fix, things that have a very low chance of breaking your code. In other words, minor fixes and those kind of things. Other items that you might want to do is if you look in maybe the report section and things like that, you might see a vulnerability that affects many projects. So investing the time into fixing or working out the changes you need to make to fix one vulnerability, you can then apply that to a large number of different places to do that. One of the important things is a vulnerability can have many paths into your application, and it's about fixing all of those paths to truly fix a vulnerability. Okay. So we're pretty much coming up to the end of the session. So Daniel, what would we expect to see in Dynatrace now once we've done that?
Yeah, so essentially, you know, for some reason it's not picking up. But let me share and show this with another vulnerability.
Absolutely, I'll make you the presenter now.
Yeah. All right, so I hope I picked the right screen to share. Hold on. For some reason it's not highlighting it. Can you see the Dynatrace UI again?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
All right, so let me just leave the goof filter up here. So essentially, when a vulnerability is then resolved, Dynatrace will flag the current status and change that from open to resolved, right? So let's see. If for some reason it doesn't work right now, so it's always the itch of doing a live demo. But essentially, that is what you should see. So let me go back to remove the filter and try one more time. So essentially, for the directory traversal, I would expect to see that that this is actually closed because we've taken care of it. And for the deployment event, we should see an event here in my Goof application. So actually, let's go back to 24 hours because we did that yesterday. And for instance, you can see last night we have we tried a couple times, so you will see those 5 deployment events, and it will give you all the good details. Version was deployed, what deployment environment it is, and so forth, right? And I would just expect to see that coming in right now. Essentially, we ran through the pipeline again. Dynatrace will tell you, the vulnerability is closed. So actually, let's go back into the directory traversal. We can see that in the event history there as well. So last night when we remediated that issue, you could see, the security problem was resolved. No further affected processes. Then it was reopened this morning. And I just expect to see that happening again now, together with the annotation, and then essentially my troubleshooting or way of analysis will be, the vulnerability is gone. I would like to understand why, and go back to the application over here and then see, right, there was a deployment. Simon did a good job. He found and immediately fixed that vulnerability, right? So that essentially closes the loop. My production is all green, and I can happily proceed.
Awesome. So Daniel, if you wanted to just share the screen back with myself, and what I'll do is thank you. And what I'll do is I'll go ahead and share this slide, which is a slide in which you can learn more about any of the things that you've seen here today around Snyk, Dynatrace, and of course Cprime as well. And it just leaves me to say a big thank you to both Daniel and Nate for joining me here today and showing you how you can enable Devsecops across the pipeline and have great integrations with Bitbucket, Jira, and of course Dynatrace as well. So thank you all for joining, and we'll see you next time.
Okay, thank you, Simon, for hosting, and thank you for attending. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thanks for having us.